Jayvion Cross didn't speak when the teacher mocked him. He just stood up, walked to the board, and rewrote Einstein's formula from memory. The class froze. Phones were recording. And in seconds, the quiet black kid became a viral sensation. But by nightfall, the same school that stayed silent during the applause was already plotting to silence him forever. And an anonymous email would start the war. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Jayvion Cross didn't walk into Crestview High like a hurricane. He slipped in quietly, almost like a rumor, someone you heard about but never really saw. His transfer papers arrived late, midway through the fall semester, a detail that didn't help him blend in any easier. The hallways of Crestview buzzed with privilege, varsity jackets, brand new sneakers, and laughter from students who'd grown up in the same zip code. Jayvion was none of those things. He was silence, not the awkward, uncertain kind. This was intentional, observant, protective. Crestview High wasn't built for kids like Jayvion. The school was a red-bricked fortress of suburban pride, tucked behind oak-lined streets and cul-de-sacs. Its classrooms smelled of fresh paint and polished ambition. The AP programs boasted college-level rigor. The theater department had a $30,000 light board. Every locker had a built-in charger. But most of all, the student body was wealthy, white, and confident. Jayvion walked its halls like a question no one wanted to answer. His arrival didn't warrant an announcement. There was no warm welcome from faculty, no student ambassador to walk him around, just a map, a generic schedule, and a half-hearted good luck from the front office secretary, who didn't even lift her eyes from her monitor. Jayvion's mother had driven him there in a borrowed car, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You don't need to prove anything, baby. Just be who you are." He had nodded. He always nodded. He wore a plain gray hoodie, slightly oversized, and jeans that had seen better days. No designer logos, no flashy kicks, just worn-down sneakers that still carried dust from his old neighborhood. He held a slim, tattered notebook in one hand, like it was something sacred. No backpack, no earbuds, just him, his notebook, and a gaze that didn't flinch from anything. In first period, honors English, the teacher mispronounced his name. He corrected her softly, and she brushed it off with a tight smile. No one turned to look at him. No one spoke. Second period, U.S. history. A few heads turned, more out of curiosity than anything.
"Where'd you transfer from?"
A boy near the back asked during a worksheet break. Jayvion just said, "Detroit," and turned back to his paper. That one word followed him. "Detroit," whispered in hallways, like it was code for something threatening. "Is he from the city? You think he got bussed in? Probably here on some equity thing." Even teachers took second glances. Jayvion didn't respond to any of it. He was used to being misread. Third period changed the temperature. Advanced placement physics. Mr. Langford ran the class like it was a TED Talk. He strutted across the room with a marker in hand, tossing out facts and formulas like confetti. He loved attention, loved being the smartest man in the room, until he didn't feel like he was anymore. Jayvion sat near the back, notebook closed, eyes steady. He listened. Closely. Mr. Langford noticed. He didn't like being watched that way, quietly, without approval. Something in Jayvion's silence unnerved him. By the third day in that class, Mr. Langford decided to make an example. "All right, everyone," he said, spinning toward the whiteboard dramatically. "Today we're talking about the most famous equation in physics, E.E.M.C. quaternaire, Einstein's gift to mankind." He grinned, scribbling it in big letters. "And since our newest student here hasn't said a word all week, how about we give him the spotlight?" Heads turned. Phones subtly lifted. Jayvion looked up. "Mr. Cross," Langford said, voice smug, "want to take a stab at deriving Einstein's formula? You know, just for fun." There was laughter. Not cruel. Just the usual teenage kind that fills awkward silences. Langford's tone made it sound like a harmless joke. But it wasn't harmless. Jayvion didn't move for a moment. His face didn't change. Then slowly, he stood. The room went quieter than anyone expected. Langford's smirk faltered. "No pressure," he added. Jayvion walked to the board with that same silent steadiness. Not hesitant, controlled. He picked up the marker. It squeaked slightly as he uncapped it. What happened next would be watched over 8 million times by the end of the week. But before the first symbol left his hand, Langford leaned back, arms crossed, waiting for him to stumble. Because this wasn't about physics. It was about putting the black kid in his place. Jayvion looked at the board. Then he began to write. The physics teacher mocks him publicly, daring him to derive Einstein's most famous equation. Mr. Langford's voice always carried a performance tone, like a man who'd missed his calling in theater and settled for an audience of high school students. Every lesson was dramatic, every formula delivered like a revelation. But underneath the polish was something colder, something smug, especially when he spoke to students who didn't mirror him. He'd seen Jayvion watching from the back row for days now. Quiet, unmoved, unreadable. That silence irked him. Mr. Langford was used to dominance, to eye contact, and note-taking, and raised hands. Jayvion offered none of that, just stillness. And worse, that unsettling kind of stillness that suggests the student might be smarter than the teacher. So when the time came to discuss mass energy equivalence, Langford spotted an opportunity. He turned to the class, marker in hand, and paced across the floor like it was a stage. E equals mc squared. Everyone's heard it. Everyone's impressed by it. But how many of you actually understand where it comes from? The question hung in the air, rhetorical, rehearsed. Students shifted in their chairs. Some scribbled the formula in their notebooks. Others stared at their phones beneath the desk. Langford continued. Now, here's a fun idea. Let's see if anyone here can derive it. Just for fun, of course. His tone grew theatrical, then cut with a false grin. Let's ask our newest classmate, Jayvion Cross. You've been awfully quiet back there. Care to take the stage? Laughter rippled, not vicious, just easy, comfortable. The kind of laughter that assumes someone else is the joke. Langford leaned against the desk with folded arms, nodding like it was all in good fun. But the truth sat just beneath, like it always does. Jayvion didn't flinch. He slowly rose from his chair. The room fell into an uneasy hush. Go ahead, Langford said, gesturing toward the whiteboard. Let's see what you've got. Jayvion stepped forward without hesitation, but not quickly either. His walk was quiet, measured. He uncapped the marker, his fingers steady. The students' eyes followed him. Some were recording on their phones, anticipating the spectacle. Some expected confusion. Others expected silence. What none of them expected, not even Jayvion, was what would happen next. He stared at the blank whiteboard, as if letting it speak to him before he spoke to it. Behind him, Langford cleared his throat, the smugness draining into something more brittle. Jayvion raised the marker and started writing. First, he laid out the basic premises, the principle of relativity, energy conservation, momentum, rest mass. He didn't just scribble symbols. He wrote as though telling a story, building logic step by step, drawing a path across a field no one else had ever dared to walk barefoot. Gasps floated in the air. Because he wasn't guessing, he was guiding. Langford stood up straight. A student in the second row whispered, "Wait, is he actually doing it?" Jayvion paused. Just briefly, as if to double-check himself, he scanned what he'd written, then continued, this time drawing on velocity, time dilation, the Lorentz factor. These weren't buzzwords. These were equations with depth, the kind that only made sense if you lived with them, felt them, trusted them. The room had gone dead silent. The smug joke had collapsed into a moment no one could understand yet. Even Jayvion wasn't sure how his brain was moving this fast. How the knowledge buried so long under fear, under silence, under survival, was just rising now, not trickling, pouring. His fingers moved without tremble. His thoughts stacked with precision. Langford walked toward the board, eyes narrowing, his mouth opened, closed. He couldn't find a correction, because there wasn't one. Jayvion reached the final step. He wrote it slowly, deliberately, E-E-M, and then he put the marker down. He turned. Half the class had their mouths slightly open. Phones were still recording, but no one was laughing anymore. Jayvion returned to his seat. Langford stood at the front of the room, face tight, arms stiff. The man who believed brilliance had a color now stood in front of something he couldn't explain, and wouldn't dare applaud. One student, a white girl near the front, whispered, "That was crazy." Another murmured, "I thought he was gonna mess up." But Jayvion didn't hear them. He stared straight ahead. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. From freedom. From finally being seen. Langford cleared his throat, tried to pull the room back into his control. Well, That was an interesting interpretation. Not quite standard, but he trailed off. And then he did something that surprised even him. He picked up the marker, tried to correct something, and paused. There was nothing to correct. The class sat in stunned silence. Then someone muttered, "Damn." And Jayvion, for the first time in Crestview, felt every eye on him, not as a target but as a reckoning. Jayvion picks up the marker and begins to write, shocking even himself. For a moment, no one breathed. The symbols on the board weren't just math. They were a language few understood, and even fewer could translate with such elegance. Jayvion hadn't just solved a problem. He'd built a bridge from logic to truth, from silence to statement. His chalk-dusted fingertips had dismantled an entire room's assumptions, piece by careful piece. Mr. Langford tried to recover. "Well," he said, voice cracking slightly, "that's a novel derivation." His eyes darted between the students, hoping for a reaction that could rescue him. None came. His authority had shifted, quietly, brutally, and everyone had felt it. Phones were already out. Screens glowed in low angles. Some students whispered as they recorded. Others zoomed in on the board. Jayvion, still seated, didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The next 10 minutes unfolded like a dream. Langford's lesson collapsed. He stumbled through his notes, stammering about theoretical physics as if the chalkboard behind him weren't screaming. His confidence shriveled. A teacher whose voice had once dominated now sounded like background noise. The bell rang. No one rushed to leave. One student, a junior named Carson, leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Bro, we just watched history." Jayvion stood, slinging his notebook under his arm. He passed Langford without looking at him. The man turned, perhaps to say something, an apology, a challenge, anything, but the words stuck. Jayvion walked out the door, and just like that, the room exhaled. The hallway outside felt different, more alert. Students from other classes had already seen the video. It spread like a spark in dry grass. Jayvion's face, the whiteboard, the silence, the subtle sound of disbelief from the background, the elegance of equations layered like music, and Langford, stiff, shrinking, stuck. By lunchtime, the clip had crossed state lines. On TikTok, a caption read, "Black kid derails racist teacher with Einstein move." On Twitter, Jayvion Cross, remember that name. But not all reactions were praise. Within hours, comments began to swarm. "This has to be staged. No way that kid figured that out on the spot." Affirmative action strikes again. He probably memorized it. Real genius can explain it. The racism came quickly, wrapped in sarcasm, disguised as skepticism. Jayvion sat outside under an oak tree, behind the cafeteria, away from the noise. He scrolled, thumb frozen halfway down the screen, as he read the hate. For every comment celebrating him, there were two casting doubt. He hadn't expected to go viral. He hadn't expected to feel exposed. Back in the classroom, Langford was spiraling. In the teacher's lounge, he dismissed the video with a laugh. "Overhyped," he said to a colleague. "The kid probably saw it on YouTube. Einstein's derivation isn't that hard if you've prepped it." But the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. The school's administration started getting emails. Parents demanding to know what happened. Some called it a disruptive event. Others demanded the teacher apologize publicly. The principal called Langford into a meeting. The tone wasn't disciplinary, not yet, but it wasn't supportive either. That night, Jayvion's mother, Tasha, watched the video in their apartment 3 times. Her lips pressed into a line. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She just watched. "Are you okay?" she asked, without turning her head. Jayvion sat on the couch, staring at the carpet. "I didn't mean for it to blow up," he said softly. Tasha nodded. "I know." But what neither of them knew, not yet, was that the video wouldn't stop there. By midnight, a second clip surfaced. A screen recording of a private group chat. Students laughing, typing. Langford smoked that kid. Why didn't he stay in Detroit? He thinks he's smart? Let's see him do it again with no warning. Jayvion's face was pasted next to gorilla emojis. The comments weren't just online anymore. They were from Crestview. From the students who sat next to him. From the classmates who smiled when he walked in. From the school that applauded itself for being diverse. On paper, a video of Jayvion goes viral within hours, but for all the wrong reasons. The morning after Jayvion's classroom video erupted online, The world felt tilt. What began as a quiet act of defiance against humiliation had become something much bigger, much louder, and much darker. Jayvion sat at the kitchen table, staring at a phone that wouldn't stop vibrating. He didn't touch it, he just listened. Each buzz was another opinion, another stranger, another wound. His mother, Tasha, stood at the sink watching him through the window reflection. She could see it, the change. Not the pride, not the confidence, the quiet fear behind his eyes. Not of being wrong, but of being punished for being right. His cereal was untouched, milk warm, spoon still. The internet had fallen in love, and turned on him in the same breath. On TikTok, edits of his derivation video looped endlessly, layered with triumphant music and bold titles like "The Next Einstein" and "Black Boy Genius Shuts Down a Racist Classroom." The comments flooded in. "This kid is the truth. I wish I had his brain." Langford got served, but nestled in between were the venomous ones. The ones dressed as logic, wrapped in skepticism. Let's be real. No kid pulls that off without prepping.
But his mom helped him memorize it.
I'm not saying he's lying, but it looks rehearsed. AF. And then, blunt racism. Affirmative action wonder boy. Still can't read a room though. One trick pony. Bet he fails calculus. By midday, Jayvion Cross trended on Twitter, and not all for the reasons it should have. News outlets reached out, reporters left voicemails, influencers tagged him, colleges mentioned him. But so did trolls, bots, and white supremacist pages, who called him the media's latest diversity puppet. Jayvion hadn't spoken publicly. He didn't want to, but the silence only made them talk louder. Crestview High remained silent too. No statement, no acknowledgement, no support. Inside the school, battle lines formed in whispers. Some students praised him, others accused him of setting the teacher up. A group chat leaked, where classmates discussed how the video makes the school look bad. One message read, "It's embarrassing. Like he came in here just to start drama." Another, "He probably watched a YouTube tutorial and timed it perfectly." Jayvion heard these whispers in locker corners, between class bells. Some students stared at him like he was famous. Others, like he was a fraud. Even Langford, humiliated as he was, began reclaiming the narrative subtly. In the teacher's lounge, he told colleagues, the derivation wasn't wrong, but it wasn't original either. Nothing revolutionary. Maybe a parlor trick. Maybe something he picked up online. By day 3, the online debate turned feral. A conservative podcast released an episode titled, Jayvion Cross, Real Genius or Woke Hype. The host questioned his intelligence, mocked his hoodie, and compared him to other viral overhyped minorities. "You ever notice these stories always hit the same beats?" the host said, smirking. "Kid comes from nowhere, humiliates white authority, and suddenly he's the next messiah. Please." It racked up 200,000 views in one day. Jayvion's inbox was a war zone. Messages from journalists, hate mail, threats disguised as jokes. Some emails came from fake accounts calling him a credit stealer, race baiter, Hood Einstein. Even his school email got flooded. But alongside the fire came light. Messages from black scientists, professors, college students, people who saw themselves in Jayvion's silence. A physics professor from MIT messaged, "You're not alone, and you're not wrong." A STEM nonprofit offered him a summer mentorship. A NASA engineer sent him a care package with a note. "They can't erase you. Keep building." Tasha read each message like armor. Jayvion read them like lifelines. Still, the cruelty of the internet had its own rhythm. And then came the blow no one saw coming. 3 days after the video hit 2 million views, the school's front office received an anonymous email. Subject: academic dishonesty. Jayvion Cross. No name, no signature, just a long cold message claiming Jayvion had plagiarized the derivation from a 3-year-old YouTube lecture by a popular white physicist. The email included links, timestamps, even screenshots comparing Jayvion's whiteboard to the online video. It was a hit job. Precise, premeditated, intentional, and the school responded with terrifying speed. Jayvion was pulled from third period by a hall monitor, taken to the vice principal's office. Alone, he wasn't greeted. He was informed. "We've received a serious allegation of academic dishonesty," the VP said, hands folded tightly. "Due to the nature of the claim, we're opening a formal investigation." Jayvion blinked. "Not, how are you feeling?" "Not, let's talk through this. Just, investigation." Tasha was called 27 minutes later. When she arrived, she didn't wait for clearance. She stormed into the front office and demanded answers. "You pulled my son out of class and accused him of cheating without me present," she asked, voice cutting glass. "We're not accusing him. We're investigating," the vice principal said, the words robotic. "You're humiliating him." "Again," Tasha replied, "and you're letting a racist email define your actions." But it was already too late. News broke online that Jayvion was under review. Blogs picked it up. Local stations framed it as a developing story. A few headlines even used phrases like plagiarism scandal before any evidence had been verified. That night, the same trolls who doubted him celebrated. "Told y'all it was too good to be true. Just another fraud with a PR team. Genius my ass." And then came the videos. Parodies of Jayvion's performance, edited with clown music. One viral TikTok showed a white boy mock reenacting the derivation and fake fainting for applause. It had 500,000 likes within 12 hours. Jayvion didn't speak. Didn't cry. He just lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the world buried him in disbelief. But something shifted in Tasha. She began printing the hate comments, saving every message, documenting every post. She wasn't just his mother anymore. She was building a case. "You don't have to fight this," she told Jayvion quietly. "I will." But Jayvion turned to her and finally spoke with weight in his voice. "No. They came after me. I'll speak for myself." An anonymous email accuses Jayvion of plagiarism, and the school launches an investigation. The room had turned against him, but the truth had a stubborn way of surfacing. In the days following the investigation announcement, more details about Jayvion's academic past started to emerge. A journalist from a regional education column had been digging and uncovered a string of local science fair wins, math competitions, and gifted program placements from Jayvion's previous school, Westside STEM Academy, a small underfunded public school tucked between two highways in a forgotten corner of Detroit. There were pictures. Jayvion at age 11, holding a trophy nearly half his size. Jayvion at 13, presenting a solar cell model to a group of local engineers. Jayvion at 15, receiving a regional grant for a study on energy transfer in collapsing systems. None of this had been online before. Westside didn't have the budget or infrastructure to promote its stars. Their victories were written on bulletin boards, not websites. Now those images made their way to Crestview. And for the first time, his classmates saw a version of Jayvion that had nothing to do with the whiteboard moment. A boy who had always been brilliant, always prepared, always building. But the revelation didn't generate the admiration it should have. In fact, it made things worse. "He's been planning this since Detroit," one student whispered near the lockers. "So this whole thing was like his launch pad? So he's not even from here, and now he's gonna ruin Langford's career?" Another muttered. Jayvion walked past these conversations like a ghost walking through smoke, always feeling the burn, never showing it. It was the cafeteria that delivered the real shock. The large TV mounted near the ceiling, usually playing sports recaps or school announcements, now played a morning news interview. The anchor smiled softly at the camera, flanked by two digital photos, one of Jayvion in the Crestview hallway, and another of him winning a statewide robotics award at his old school. "This young man's story raises urgent questions about equity in education," the anchor said. "But it also has some critics questioning whether the viral moment at Crestview was truly spontaneous." That phrase, "truly spontaneous," sparked a new cycle of speculation. Students began treating Jayvion not as a peer, but a plant, an agenda, a disruption. His classroom presence became uncomfortable. Teachers avoided eye contact. Even those who used to nod when he answered correctly now moved on quickly, as if acknowledging him would make them complicit in something they didn't fully understand. The STEM Fair Committee quietly removed him from the participants list. No announcement, just a blank space where his name had been. Jayvion didn't confront anyone. He didn't argue. He just started staying in the library longer, walking slower between periods, and eating lunch alone under the oak tree out back. Tasha noticed the shift. She came home from work one evening and found him at the kitchen table, flipping through his notebook, only to close it slowly. "Talk to me," she said. "They don't see me," he replied. "Not really. They saw the video. Then they saw the story. But they never saw me." She sat beside him. "I see you, always." But in Crestview, his vision had been twisted into narrative, and narratives, once fed by fear, grow teeth. The next twist came in the form of a staff meeting. A transcript leaked, anonymously from a closed-door faculty discussion. In it, Mr. Langford was quoted saying, "I never mocked the boy. I simply asked him a question." The video was taken out of context, edited. Maybe, but I never insulted him. That statement hit like a spark in dry grass. Within hours, blogs ran with headlines like, "Teacher denies racist accusation. Says video was misleading." Langford's former students, the ones who once laughed at his dry jokes, now defended him online. He was tough, not racist. He jokes with everyone like that. Jayvion was just too sensitive. Jayvion read the words. Every single one. The denial. The deflection. The betrayal. He didn't know which was worse, that Langford had twisted the truth, or that so many were ready to believe him. He remembered that moment at the whiteboard. The laughter, the way Langford had smirked like it was all just a performance. And now, that same teacher was calling it taken out of context. It felt like being pushed into a pool and then blamed for making waves. The administration released a short statement. "We are reviewing all classroom footage and conducting interviews with staff and students to clarify the events surrounding the viral incident." But there was no urgency in their tone, no protection in their posture. Just distance. Jayvion began documenting everything. His mother helped collecting screenshots, saving emails, archiving DMs, not for revenge, for survival. Because she knew what happened to black boys, whose brilliance threatened the comfort of white institutions. They were erased. Or worse, redefined. Mr. Langford denies ever mocking Jayvion, and claims the video was taken out of context. The folding chairs in the Crestview High gymnasium screeched against the polished floor, as the crowd grew restless. A line of parents, teachers, and students snaked out the back of the room, murmuring, shifting, waiting for the meeting to start. The November air outside was brittle, but inside, the temperature was something else entirely. Tense, electric, almost combustible. The agenda was supposed to be routine. Budget reports, upcoming winter concerts, teacher evaluations. But everyone knew what they had really come to hear. It was printed uncomfortably on everyone's face. Jayvion Cross. He hadn't been invited to speak. Of course not. He wasn't on the PTA roster. He wasn't even in school that week. But his presence hung over the room like fog, thick and undeniable. Tasha sat near the front, her back straight, eyes sharp. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing loud. Just a simple navy blazer, over a white blouse. She didn't come to dazzle. She came to be heard. Jayvion had stayed home, curled into silence. He hadn't wanted her to come. "They're not going to listen," he'd said quietly. "I'm not coming for them to listen," she'd replied. "I'm coming so they can't say they didn't know." The meeting began with pleasantries and applause. The principal gave a dry summary of quarterly academic performance. The treasurer read budget numbers. But the hum in the room didn't settle until the floor was opened for parent remarks. Tasha didn't wait. She rose before anyone else could. "I'm Tasha Cross," she said clearly, voice steady. "Mother of Jayvion Cross. And I have something to say." The room quieted. Not because they wanted to hear her, but because they wanted to watch what she'd do. "I raised a child who reads physics textbooks for fun. Who taught himself differential equations before he had a learner's permit. Who solved one of the most iconic derivations in modern science, in front of a classroom that wasn't built to recognize him." She paused, letting her breath fill the silence. "And now, because that brilliance made people uncomfortable, he's being investigated, suspended, silenced. Not because he did anything wrong, but because the world wasn't ready for a black boy who didn't ask for permission before being great." A few claps rippled from the back. A father in a hoodie nodded slowly. But then the pushback. A blonde woman in a red cardigan stood, arms folded. "We're all here for our kids," she began, her voice laced with condescension. "But coming in here accusing the entire school of racism isn't gonna help your son's case." Tasha didn't flinch. "I'm not accusing the school. I'm describing what happened." Another parent chimed in. A man in khakis and glasses. "What if the school's just doing its job? There's a procedure for academic dishonesty." Tasha's tone didn't shift. Where was that procedure when the teacher mocked him publicly? When students edited his face onto racist memes? When an anonymous email got more respect than my son's entire academic history? A few gasps, a few mumbles. The room split, not evenly, but clearly. Some folded arms in defense. Others leaned forward, listening. The superintendent stepped up to the mic. We are reviewing all reports and taking this matter seriously. We ask for patience while we conduct a fair investigation. Tasha turned to him. Would you ask for patience if it were your son being targeted? If it were your child being painted as a fraud because he didn't look like what this school expects genius to look like? The room was silent, and then as if on cue students began entering from the back. A small group at first. 5. Then 10. Then more. They were carrying signs. We are Jayvion. Let him learn. Gifted, not guilty. A teacher tried to intervene. This isn't part of the meeting, but the students stood firm. The protest had begun. A girl from the school newspaper held up her phone. Live streaming. A sophomore with pink braids stood beside her holding a cardboard sign that read, Crestview silences Black excellence. It spread quickly. Within minutes, the video reached Twitter. Local reporters who had been denied interviews earlier now had fresh footage. The hashtags resurfaced. Justice for Jayvion. Let him learn. But not everyone clapped. A woman in the third row turned to the student protesters and muttered, This is exactly the kind of disruption that keeps the real students from learning.
The words stung. The real students.
Tasha didn't respond to her. She didn't have to. The silence spoke loud enough. But the unexpected twist came when Principal Hargrove cleared his throat and leaned toward the mic. After careful consideration, he said, voice overly composed, and in the interest of preserving an orderly learning environment during the ongoing investigation, the school has decided to suspend Jayvion Cross until the matter is resolved. The words dropped like bricks, gasps, whispers, then a roar of disbelief from the back. Tasha froze. Her face didn't change, but her hands curled into fists at her side. A student shouted, You're punishing him for being smart. Another yelled, Suspend the teacher, not the student. But the decision was final. Jayvion Cross, the boy who solved an equation and became a lightning rod, was now officially barred from his own school. And as his mother turned and walked out of the gym, the entire room watched her. Some with admiration, others with quiet resentment. The school decides to suspend Jayvion until the investigation concludes. Jayvion's suspension email arrived at 7:32 a.m. Sharp, sterile, emotionless, and written like a policy memo. Effective immediately, Jayvion Cross is suspended from Crestview High School, pending the conclusion of the investigation. This decision is made in the interest of maintaining a positive and distraction-free academic environment. A distraction. That was the word they used. The boy who'd solved Einstein's formula in seconds was now officially a disturbance. Tasha read the email twice before her hands began to tremble. She called the school immediately. The front office transferred her twice before she reached the principal's assistant. The woman on the other end spoke with mechanical politeness, the kind that sounds practiced, not empathetic. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Cross, but this is just temporary until the board finishes its review, she said. Review of what? Tasha demanded. You have no evidence he did anything wrong. I can't speak to that, ma'am. It's procedural. That word again. Procedural. It meant nothing, but it sounded official enough to hide behind. When she hung up, Tasha looked over at her son. Jayvion sat at the dining table, head bowed over his notebook, the same one he used in class the day everything changed. The pen in his hand hovered but didn't move. They made their decision, he said quietly. Doesn't matter what we say. Tasha's throat tightened. Then we make them hear it anyway. Outside, November's light was thin and gray. Crestview High looked the same as it always did. Neat, polished, unbothered. But now the same building that once promised opportunity had become the epicenter of humiliation. When Jayvion arrived with his mother to retrieve his things, every hallway whisper turned sharper. Students parted ways to make room for him, not out of respect, but curiosity. Some phones discreetly recorded as he walked by. There he is, someone muttered. Did you see the email? My dad says he should have been expelled. The principal met them in his office. His voice was calm but distant, eyes fixed on his paperwork instead of their faces. We want to minimize further media attention. The situation has caused unnecessary division. Tasha leaned forward. Division caused by what? A teacher mocking a student or a school refusing to protect him. The principal hesitated. Mrs. Cross, please understand. We have to maintain neutrality. Neutrality, Tasha said, voice trembling but controlled. When a black child is accused without evidence, neutrality is the act of choosing a side. Jayvion didn't speak. He just looked at the desk, tracing the wood grain with his eyes. The principal cleared his throat. He'll have access to remote coursework during the suspension. How long? Until the review concludes. No date. No end. Just limbo. That evening, the local news aired a segment titled Crestview Controversy, Viral Teen Suspended. The reporter's tone was polished, professional, detached from the human cost. Crestview High School remains under scrutiny following the suspension of 16-year-old student Jayvion Cross, she said. Administrators claim the move is to preserve academic integrity, but supporters argue it reflects racial bias within the school system. Clips of students protesting played. Tasha's PTA speech ran in fragments. Then came Langford's statement, recorded in his classroom, the same space where everything began. I never intended any harm, Langford said. I treat all my students equally. The video circulating online was taken out of context. What people forget is that sometimes, in classrooms, things get misinterpreted. It was a learning moment, not a personal attack. He smiled gently. The camera cut to the anchor nodding. Within hours, Langford's version became the preferred story for those who needed an easier narrative, one that didn't involve accountability. At Crestview, whispers grew bolder. Teachers stopped mentioning Jayvion's name in class. Assignments he'd aced were under review. His achievements were erased from the bulletin board outside the science lab. His name vanished from the honor students' wall. It wasn't just suspension. It was disappearance. By Friday, Tasha's phone rang nonstop. Civil rights organizations called. Journalists requested interviews. Some offered support. Others wanted sound bites. She declined most of them, but one message stood out. It was from a woman named Alicia Ramirez, a former student of Mr. Langford. Her voicemail was short but heavy. Mrs. Cross, I think I know what's happening. I've been there too. Please call me back. Tasha did, immediately. Alicia's voice on the other end was nervous, almost shaking. I graduated 3 years ago, she said. Mr. Langford used to joke about me in class. Said things like, "You're smart for a Latina." He always said it with a laugh, so no one complained. But when I got into Stanford, he told people it was because of a diversity quota. Tasha's jaw clenched. Did you report it? I tried, Alicia said. They told me not to make trouble. Said I was misinterpreting him. Same word they're using now. She paused. There's more. He had a file, a private folder on his desk. He kept notes about students, who he thought cheated, who he thought didn't belong. He said it helped him track patterns. Tasha felt her chest tighten. Patterns? Racial ones, Alicia whispered. I saw my name in it. The call ended with a promise. Alicia would find proof. Tasha hung up, her mind racing. She turned to Jayvion, who had been sitting silently on the couch. Laptop open to a local news page filled with comments tearing him apart. Someone else is coming forward, she said. He didn't look up. It won't change anything. They already decided who I am. She knelt beside him. Then we remind them. That weekend, the Cross family's mailbox overflowed. Letters from strangers across the country. Some were supportive, some hateful. One simply read, "You're making our town look bad. Take him somewhere else." Jayvion stopped opening them. Instead, he spent his days reading. Not textbooks, case studies, articles, history books. He was piecing together something bigger, a map of how injustice worked. Every detail mattered, the silence, the tone, the policies disguised as fairness. He wasn't angry anymore. He was awake. One afternoon he walked into his room and found his mother staring at his old science fair trophies. The ones from Detroit. The gold had dulled, but the plaques still gleamed. You know what I hate most? She said softly. That they made you believe brilliance needs permission. Jayvion looked at her, voice barely above a whisper. They're scared of me, Mom. Good, she replied. Then let them be. By Monday, Alicia's story hit the press. She had shared old emails, a photo of Langford's pattern folder, and a letter she had once written to the school board, ignored at the time. The revelation spread fast. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Former student accuses Crestview teacher of discrimination. Langford went silent. The district announced a new internal inquiry. And for the first time, the Cross family wasn't alone. Students started speaking up, quietly at first, then louder. A few mentioned the jokes, the favoritism, The subtle grading bias. Crestview High wasn't spotless anymore. It was cracked open. But the most chilling twist came late that night, when Tasha's phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. Same anonymous number that had once sent the tip about the email. A voice disguised, muffled spoke just 6 words before the line cut out. Langford didn't act alone. Check higher. Tasha sat in silence, phone trembling in her hand. And somewhere in the house, Jayvion opened his notebook again. This time, not to calculate energy, but to document every detail of a system designed to drain his own. A former student of Mr. Langford comes forward with a disturbing secret. As Alicia Ramirez's story broke through the walls of Crestview High, it did more than tarnish Mr. Langford's reputation. It unlocked a vault of silent memories in the minds of former students. What had once been brushed off as just Langford being Langford, now echoed with sharp clarity, a pattern deliberate and disturbing. Jayvion scrolled through the comments on a local Facebook post about the school's internal inquiry. Most were from alumni, one name after another, typing out their memories, not always dramatic, but all laced with the same quiet cruelty. He once told me, "Try not to sound too urban when you answer." He told my parents I was more of a hands-on learner when I applied for AP chemistry, and I'm now a chemical engineer. Every time I answered a question, he'd double-check it like he didn't trust me. Never did that to the other kids. The common thread wasn't just racism, it was how easily it had been ignored. For years, Langford had been considered a staple of Crestview, a high-standards educator, a no-nonsense type. His classroom ran like a ship, quiet, tight, efficient. But behind that order lived a deeper truth. He didn't believe every student belonged equally. Jayvion sat on the floor of his bedroom, laptop open, headphones in. He listened to an Instagram live, hosted by an alum named Keon Palmer, black now in college, once in Langford's class. His tone was calm but deliberate. "I remember getting a question right, dead right." And Langford said, "Lucky guess." The whole class laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when the room's not built for you. But now, I realize what it was. He paused, swallowing hard. Jayvion's not the first. He's just the one who made it impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Tasha was printing. Every screenshot, every testimonial, every message from students past and present. Her dining room table was buried in paper, rows and rows of black and brown students recounting the same wounds. "This isn't about one teacher," she said aloud. "This is about the system that kept his hands clean." That night, she sent an open letter to the district. It was sharp, it was factual, and it was unflinching. It demanded that Langford be placed on administrative leave, and that an independent investigation, not an internal one, be launched. Within 24 hours, it had over 40,000 signatures. But the institution didn't crack easily. Crestview released a bland public statement. "We take allegations seriously and are committed to fostering an inclusive environment." No mention of Jayvion. No mention of Langford. But then came the twist no one expected. An anonymous Dropbox link was sent to a student journalist at the school newspaper. Inside, emails between teachers. Internal, casual, never meant to see daylight. One email, from a faculty member to another, read, "Langford's gonna get us all burned. Told him last year to stop singling out those kids. Guess he didn't listen." Another, "If Jayvion makes noise, it's going to be a PR nightmare. Can we get ahead of this?" The student journalist hesitated, then published screenshots in the next issue, under the title "They Knew." The article hit harder than any protest. This wasn't just Langford. It was everyone who watched. Everyone who warned him quietly. Everyone who protected their own comfort while letting students like Jayvion pay the cost. Suddenly, faculty who had stayed quiet began to fidget. Teachers started calling in sick. Some deleted their social media. The district scrambled to control the narrative. Jayvion read the article in silence. Then he whispered, "They knew." Tasha stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders. But now everyone knows. But it wasn't just about knowing anymore. It was about what would come next. Because another email in the leak, buried deep, almost overlooked, hinted at something even bigger. One line from a department head, dated 3 days before the derivation incident, read, "We may want to watch Cross. Langford says he's trouble." Which meant they were waiting for a reason. Which meant the system didn't react to Jayvion's brilliance. It anticipated it. A leaked email between faculty suggests they knew Jayvion was telling the truth all along. The morning after the faculty email leak, Crestview High was no longer just a school. It had become a battlefield for perception, power, and truth. What started as whispers had erupted into full-blown outrage. And this time, it wasn't just coming from the outside. It began with a poster taped to every locker. Walk out for Jayvion. Friday, enough is enough. The message was clear. The students were done waiting for the administration to act. By 10:02 a.m. on Friday, the hallways were silent, not because no one cared, but because almost every student was standing outside, arms locked, voices loud, signs waved in the air. Protect Black brilliance. Suspend racism. Not genius, and Jayvion deserved better. What shocked the faculty more than the numbers was the diversity. Black, white, Latino, Asian, students who rarely agreed on anything, stood shoulder to shoulder chanting one name, Jayvion. Inside the building, Principal Hargrove stared out his window, lines slightly parted, face pale. We didn't expect this, he whispered to no one in particular. At the center of the crowd stood Amaya, the editor of the school newspaper, with a bullhorn in one hand, and a determined look in her eyes. We are not leaving until Crestview acknowledges what it did, not just to Jayvion, but to every student who's ever been told they don't belong. The local media showed up within 30 minutes. Then national cameras followed. Microphones were thrust in every direction, but the students remained united. We're not here to talk, one said. We're here to demand. Meanwhile, Tasha watched the live coverage from her living room, hand pressed to her mouth, eyes damp. Jayvion sat beside her, silent, watching classmates risk detention and more, for his name. He turned to her slowly. They didn't have to do this. She shook her head. No, but they chose to. By noon, the protest had spread beyond the campus. Parents joined. Teachers who had once stayed silent now stood near the gates, holding signs. One read, Langford knew, so did you. The district was forced to respond. They released a statement that evening, calling the protest a powerful expression of student voice, but avoided any mention of Langford, the emails, or Jayvion's suspension. That only made things worse. By Monday, 2 major community organizations had called for Langford's immediate removal. Hashtags surged again, Free Jayvion, Crestview cover-up. When will they learn? But the story had grown bigger than just one student. Cable networks hosted panels on institutional racism in education. Twitter threads broke down systemic bias in AP programs. Black scholars began publicly defending Jayvion, not just for the derivation, but for surviving the consequences of it. And still, Jayvion remained quiet. He turned down interview requests, declined talk show offers, refused to become anyone's poster boy. He didn't want to be famous. He wanted to be left alone. But history rarely grants peace to those who disrupt it. One night, while sitting at the kitchen table, head bowed over a page of scribbled equations, a knock echoed at the door. Tasha opened it to find a courier in a Navy uniform. Package for Jayvion Cross, he said. No return address. Just a thick white envelope sealed with a gold crest. Jayvion opened it slowly, his fingers trembling despite himself. Inside was a letter, cream paper, embossed ink. Harvard University, Office of Admission, Pre-College Advanced Research Fellowship offer. The letter praised his intellectual curiosity, referenced the viral video, acknowledged the suspension controversy, and concluded with a clear, unexpected invitation. We believe your potential speaks louder than your circumstances. Should you accept, we would be honored to support your academic journey. Jayvion stared at the letter for a long moment. His breath caught in his chest. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just whispered, They saw me. But Tasha standing behind him didn't celebrate yet. Her face was still, her voice low. They saw you now, she said. But what happens if you say yes? Jayvion looked up. The media would twist it. Critics would accuse him of being rewarded for playing the victim. Crestview would use it to shift blame. The world might say, see, it all worked out in the end. But nothing about it had worked out. Not the trauma.
Not the hate mail.
Not the weeks of being told he didn't belong. The offer wasn't redemption. It was recognition. Long overdue. And still, the decision sat heavy. He placed the letter on the table gently, as if it were made of glass. Because in the middle of the storm, a single door had opened. And behind it, everything could change. Jayvion receives a letter from a prestigious university offering him an opportunity that could change everything. The Harvard letter hadn't even cooled on the kitchen table when the next envelope arrived, this time via email, with a digital crest and the subject line, Formal Invitation, National Youth Science Symposium. Jayvion read it once, then twice, mouth slightly parted. The symposium was one of the most prestigious in the country, an elite gathering of young minds hand-picked to present cutting-edge research, emerging theories, and academic breakthroughs. They weren't just inviting Jayvion to attend. They wanted him to present. The letter referenced his derivation. It called his work an exemplary demonstration of intuitive theoretical grasp. They didn't ask about his GPA. They didn't care about his disciplinary status. They had seen brilliance and reached for it. Jayvion blinked at the screen, almost afraid to move. Tasha leaned over his shoulder. "They want you." He nodded, quietly. It was more than a gesture. It was an opportunity to reclaim the very narrative that had tried to swallow him whole. But Crestview had other plans. Jayvion emailed the principal's office that afternoon, requesting permission to travel under school representation, as required for all symposium students. The response came the next morning. Dry, cold, bureaucratic. At this time, Mr. Cross remains under active disciplinary review and may not participate in off-campus academic events under Crestview's endorsement. His attendance would compromise the integrity of our ongoing investigation. It didn't matter that the investigation had yielded no proof. It didn't matter that multiple former students had come forward. It didn't even matter that Langford had been placed on leave pending further inquiry. Crestview wasn't interested in justice. They were interested in control. Jayvion sat at the kitchen table staring at the email. His eyes didn't move. His fingers clenched slightly. Tasha was pacing. "They can't stop you from going," she said. "They can't stop me," Jayvion replied. "But they can stop what it means." Without the school's endorsement, he'd attend as an independent. No affiliation, no Crestview badge, no institutional backing. It would be as if he were just some rogue student who wandered into brilliance by accident. And that was the point. They didn't want him gone. They wanted him invisible. Tasha's chest rose slowly with breath. Then she turned, walked to the counter, and pulled out a yellow folder. Inside were all the documents she'd been collecting. Emails, timelines, statements, screenshots, letters from former students, and now the school's denial in writing. "This," she said, "is the last straw." Jayvion looked up, startled. "We're filing suit," she said. "Civil rights violation. Emotional distress. Targeted discrimination." Jayvion stared at her, unsure. "I don't want more attention," he said. She met his eyes. "You didn't ask for attention. You asked to be seen. There's a difference." He didn't speak. "So she did. You gave them proof. You gave them brilliance. You gave them patience. They answered you with silence. Now, we answer back." By the end of the week, the Cross family had retained counsel. Not some local generalist, a civil rights attorney who had taken on school boards before. Her name was Camille Worth. Sharp, unapologetic, and as she said in her first meeting, not here to make friends. The lawsuit landed like a hammer. Jayvion Cross versus Crestview Unified School District. It accused the district of enabling racial discrimination, fostering a hostile academic environment, and deliberately obstructing Jayvion's academic opportunities. It included affidavits from Alicia Ramirez and other former students. It cited the faculty email leak. It listed every step the school took or didn't take to protect its most vulnerable students. Within 48 hours, the media descended again. And this time the story had changed. Jayvion was no longer just a suspended student. He was a plaintiff, a challenger, a name on a court docket that threatened to expose everything Crestview had tried to bury. Still, the school didn't back down. At a hastily organized board meeting, the superintendent stood in front of flashing cameras and said, "We regret that this has escalated to legal action. Our intent has always been fairness." Camille Worth responded on national TV. If fairness were the intent, Jayvion would be presenting in D.C. right now. The crowd applauded. Back in their apartment, Jayvion watched the headlines shift. For once, they didn't call him controversial. They called him courageous. But the truth? He didn't feel brave. He felt tired. "I never wanted this," he told Camille during a prep session. She nodded. "None of our clients do. But most don't survive long enough to fight." Jayvion paused. "What if we lose?" She looked him in the eye. "Then they still lose the silence." Days before the symposium, Jayvion received another letter. This one from the symposium board. "We understand you'll be attending independently. We've made accommodations. You will close the first day of the event. Headliner slot. We want your voice to be the one the world remembers." Jayvion held the letter in his lap for a long while. Because despite the lawsuits, the protests, The betrayals, someone somewhere, still believed his voice had value. And that was a kind of justice too. Jayvion's mother files a lawsuit against the school district. The courtroom was too clean. That was Jayvion's first thought as he stepped inside. It smelled of polish and paper, the walls bare and sterile like a place that prided itself on being neutral. But he knew better. Neutrality was never neutral when your skin made others uncomfortable. Jayvion sat beside Tasha at the plaintiff's table, a dark blue blazer on his shoulders. Borrowed, slightly too big. His lawyer Camille Worth stood poised beside them, flipping calmly through her notes. She wasn't nervous. She was loaded. Across the aisle sat the district's legal team, 3 suits, 2 laptops, 1 goal: protect the institution at all costs. Their expressions were flat, professional, efficient, not a trace of shame on any face. Judge McAllister, a seasoned black woman in her 60s, presided. She had a face that betrayed no emotion, only experience. She had seen stories like Jayvion's before, too many times. That didn't make this one any less important. The district opened first. Their lead attorney, a man named Griffin Cole, spoke with rehearsed sincerity. This case is not about race. It is about process, about policy, about a school district exercising due diligence in the face of academic irregularities. We commend young Jayvion for his intellect. But intellect must be met with integrity. Jayvion didn't flinch. Griffin continued. The school had reason to investigate. There was an anonymous tip. There was a questionable derivation. And there was a teacher who, despite how the internet has chosen to paint him, has served this community for over 20 years, without formal complaint. That was their strategy. Not to attack Jayvion head-on, but to undermine him sideways. Raise doubt, chip away slowly. They presented sanitized emails, cherry-picked classroom footage, and performance reviews of Langford, as rigorous and respected. Then they pivoted to Jayvion's academic file, dissecting it like it was a police record. He transferred mid-semester, Cole noted. No formal placement test. No documented gifted program. At his former school. Camille stood sharply. Objection. Relevance. Sustained, the judge said. Get to the point, Mr. Cole. But the seed had been planted. Next they projected Jayvion's social media on a screen. Not hateful posts. He never made those. But out-of-context tweets from his classmates. Comments twisting his silence into arrogance. Photos edited to mock him. This was the environment our school sought to diffuse. Cole claimed. We weren't punishing. We were protecting. Camille leaned toward Jayvion, whispered. They're trying to make you the problem. Don't move. Then it was their turn. Camille approached the jury with no theatrics. Just steel. This case is not about process, she said. It's about power. The kind that pretends it's blind while watching students of color fall through the cracks, or get shoved through them. She walked slowly. Jayvion Cross solved an equation that should have earned him applause. Instead, he got accused, suspended, humiliated. Why? Because his brilliance challenged the quiet racism this district doesn't want to name. She turned to the bench. Today we'll name it for them. Then came the exhibits. A timeline of the school's failure to act. Testimonies from former students. The leaked emails. The folder Alicia described, now court admitted. Screenshots of messages between staff. Quotes that read like confession. Jayvion watched it all unfold, like reading a story he already knew but never thought the world would care to hear. Then Camille brought Tasha to the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She told the truth. My son didn't ask for this, she said. He wanted to learn, to grow. He never asked to go viral. But once he did, they punished him for being seen. They punished him for being visible in a space that only wants black students when they're quiet and grateful. A pin could have dropped. The district objected twice during her testimony. Both were overruled. Then came the twist. Camille's wild card. She called Aaron Monroe, a black former teacher at Crestview, who had left abruptly 2 years ago. His testimony cracked everything open. I left because I was told not to ruffle feathers, he said. Langford's comments? They weren't occasional. They were systemic, and the administration knew. He produced emails he'd saved, memos he'd written. One subject line read, concerns about racial climate in the science department. Nothing had been done. And now, the school's defense was unraveling. But the climax arrived when Camille called Mr. Langford himself to the stand. The courtroom held its breath. Langford wore a gray suit, a tie too tight around his neck. He looked older than usual, smaller somehow. He raised his hand, swore his oath, and took his seat. Camille began, calm and precise.
Mr. Langford, did you ask Jayvion Cross to solve Einstein's equation in front of the class?
I did, he replied stiffly. Was it a random selection? Yes. Do you often challenge new students with complex unscheduled tasks in front of the entire class? Pause. Not often. Then why him? Langford shifted. He seemed disengaged. I thought it would help him connect. Connect. By public demonstration. Langford nodded once. Were you aware that his classmates recorded the incident? I was made aware afterward. Do you believe that moment was taken out of context? I do. Why? Langford straightened. Because I never mocked him. I was giving him an opportunity. Camille held up a transcript. This is the classroom recording. Before you called on him, you said, and I quote, "Let's see if the new kid's up for it. This should be fun." Langford's face froze. The jury shifted. Is that opportunity or ridicule, Mr. Langford? He swallowed. Context matters. Indeed it does, Camille said. Like the context of your private folder, categorizing students by perceived threat levels. The courtroom gasped. Camille didn't stop. And in that folder beside Jayvion's name, you wrote one word. Watch. Can you explain that? Langford's mouth opened, closed. Then he said, I don't recall writing that. You wrote it 2 days before the derivation incident. No response. Were you anticipating failure, Mr. Langford? Or setting a trap? Silent. Then the judge spoke. Mr. Langford, you are under oath. And just like that, Langford slipped. I was concerned that he'd try to make a name for himself. The courtroom fell dead quiet. Camille raised an eyebrow. By being smart? Langford said nothing, and Jayvion for the first time looked directly at him. Not with anger, not even with sadness, just the quiet strength of someone who had survived what should have broken him. Mr. Langford is forced to testify under oath, and slips up. The courtroom was silent, not the uncomfortable kind, but the stunned, irreversible kind that settles in when the truth finally breaks through all the noise. Mr. Langford's last words still echoed in the air. I was concerned that he'd try to make a name for himself. It wasn't just a slip. It was an admission that he had targeted Jayvion, not for behavior, not for disruption, but for daring to carry genius inside the body of a quiet black boy. Judge McAllister leaned forward, pen tapping lightly against her notes. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in her posture told the room she had heard what she needed to hear. The jury sat frozen. One woman in the second row blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the weight of what had just been said. Camille Worth, standing inches from Langford, allowed the silence to stretch. Then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff rests. Langford stepped down without a word. He didn't meet Jayvion's eyes. He didn't look at the gallery. His shoulders curled inward like the truth had finally begun to weigh something. The district's defense team didn't ask for redirect. They had nothing left to work with. Every strategy they brought into the courtroom had collapsed under the weight of Langford's ego, and the receipts Camille had stacked high like dominoes. And those receipts kept landing. Camille had introduced more than testimony. She had introduced documents the school never thought would see the light of day. A file of internal complaints, many unsigned but all consistent. Langford makes backhanded comments to students of color. He discourages black and brown students from enrolling in AP-level courses. He called a student's accent distracting. Told me I should consider vocational school. I had a 3.9 GPA. Then came the classroom footage, unedited, time-stamped, court-admissible. Jayvion, quiet in the back. Langford's voice, loud and sharp. Let's see if the new kid's up for it. This should be fun. Laughter. Then Jayvion at the board, silent but confident. Langford folding his arms, smiling as the room watches. Then Langford again, after the applause dies down. Interesting interpretation. Let's talk about real methods now. The courtroom watched the clip 3 times. By the third, even the defense attorneys stopped taking notes. Tasha sat with her hand on Jayvion's knee. She hadn't cried during any of this. Not in court, not during interviews, not even after the lawsuit was filed. But now her eyes glistened, because this was the first time someone had played back the harm in a room that had to listen. Judge McAllister cleared her throat. I believe I've heard sufficient testimony to rule. Murmurs broke out. Even Camille looked surprised.
No closing arguments, Your Honor.
Griffin Cole asked. The judge raised one hand. I don't need them. She looked at Jayvion, then at Langford, then down at her desk, where the paper trail of silence and protection lay exposed. I have presided over many cases where institutions hid behind policy, she said. But rarely have I seen one where the damage was so well documented, and so willfully ignored. She looked to the defense. Your school failed to protect a student. Then it tried to erase him. Jayvion's breath caught. Effective immediately. Judge McAllister continued. I am issuing a declaratory judgment in favor of Jayvion Cross. Gasps. Crestview Unified is to issue a public apology, expunge the suspension from Mr. Cross's record, and release any holds on his academic portfolio. Additionally, this court recommends administrative review of Mr. Langford's certification and teaching history. The room buzzed, a dozen voices whispering at once. But the judge wasn't done. One more thing. She paused. I am recommending the Department of Education open a broader investigation into Crestview Unified School District, past and present, for systemic discrimination practices. That landed like thunder. Jayvion stared, frozen. Not out of disbelief, but from the quiet ache of finally being believed. Camille leaned over, whispered, You just made history. Tasha didn't move. She didn't clap. She just closed her eyes and let out a breath she'd been holding since the day her son walked into that classroom and was told to perform like a circus act. But just as the room began to shift, lawyers packing bags, reporters rushing out, Judge McAllister raised her voice again. This matter may be closed in this courtroom, she said, but that doesn't mean it's over. She turned to Langford. You will remain under oath for one final inquiry. Langford stiffened. She passed a slip of paper to the bailiff, who handed it to him.
This email was sent to your private account. It references a conversation between you and another faculty member the day before the incident.
Langford unfolded the paper. His lips parted slightly. I'm going to read the first line, the judge said. She looked directly at him. If the boy tries to pull anything, don't worry, we'll make sure it doesn't go far. Admin is on our side. The courtroom went still again. Langford's mouth opened, then closed. The judge halts the trial and delivers a surprise verdict. Jayvion didn't cry when the judge ruled in his favor. He didn't smile. He didn't raise his fist or exhale a triumphant breath. He just sat there, blinking slowly, as if his body hadn't yet accepted that the war, at least this part of it, was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters lined the sidewalk like statues. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. Camille stood firm, shielding him from the chaos with her body, her briefcase clenched tight in one hand. Tasha walked on his other side, her face unreadable. She wasn't interested in celebration, only in preservation. When they reached the car, Jayvion turned back once, just once. The courthouse steps behind him were crowded with headlines. Black teen wins civil rights case against school. Judge slams Crestview over racial bias. Justice for Jayvion Cross. It all sounded good. Polished. Satisfying. But Jayvion knew better. Vindication isn't victory. The apology came days later. A carefully written statement, signed by the superintendent and released across all district platforms. We acknowledge our failure to protect Jayvion Cross from an unjust academic process. The suspension has been formally rescinded, and his record expunged. We extend our sincere apologies to the Cross family. It had all the right words. It checked every legal box. But it didn't feel like healing. It felt like strategy. The same week, a new email went out to all Crestview staff. Mandatory training on equity and implicit bias. The words sounded good too. But Jayvion had sat in rooms full of well-meaning people before. He'd seen how fast good intentions vanished when power was threatened. When he returned to school, the atmosphere was surreal. The same students who once whispered behind his back now smiled too widely. Teachers called on him with exaggerated politeness. His locker had been decorated by whom? He never found out. Streamers. A card that read, "Welcome back, genius." But the trust was gone. He walked through the halls like a ghost with weight. Not invisible, visible in every direction. But still alone. The kind of aloneness that isn't about numbers, but understand. Crestview had been forced to see him, but only after the world had already watched. He attended class quietly. Submitted assignments early, refused interviews, turned down podcast requests, sponsorships, even a documentary offer. Not every pain becomes content, he told Tasha. She nodded. She didn't push. The symposium had invited him back for a second presentation, this time as a keynote speaker. He declined that too. He didn't need more stages. He needed space. It was 2 weeks after the court ruling, when the real twist arrived. He was walking past room 3B, Langford's old classroom, when he paused. The door was slightly ajar. A new teacher was at the front, a substitute they hadn't named yet. He was white, mid-30s, polished, upbeat, trying too hard. Jayvion wasn't eavesdropping, not at first. But then he heard it, a student's name being called in a tone too familiar. Then laughter. Then, if you know so much, why don't you come up and show us? Jayvion froze. The class quieted. The air changed. He stepped closer. The student being called out was a freshman, black, slender, shy, sitting in the back, just like Jayvion had. He looked confused, unsure whether it was a joke or a challenge. His hand stayed glued to the desk. Jayvion felt it in his chest. The slow, suffocating pressure of performance wrapped in mockery. He knew this moment, knew it by name. He tapped lightly on the doorframe. The teacher looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" Jayvion stepped into the room. His voice was calm but sharp. "Don't do that." The teacher blinked. "Excuse me?" "Don't turn curiosity into punishment. That's not how students grow." The room was dead silent. Jayvion turned to the student. "You're good. Stay where you are." Then he turned back to the teacher. Eyes locked. "We've seen this story already. It doesn't end well." And then he walked away. Behind him, a murmur of respect echoed quietly through the class. Jayvion didn't need applause. He had become the thing Crestview never prepared for. Not a victim. Not a martyr. A mirror. And that mirror would not be ignored again. Jayvion walks past the classroom where it all began, and sees someone new being humiliated. The day Jayvion walked out of Crestview High for the last time, the sky was the same dull gray it had been the day he arrived. But he was different. He walked taller, not because he was proud, but because he had survived. His name had become a headline, a hashtag, a court case. But beneath it all, he was still a student, who had once solved an equation, hoping to disappear back into his seat.
That option was gone now.
He could no longer pretend he didn't have something the world needed. So he started small. At first it was a Google form, one link, shared privately among a handful of students who had reached out to him after the trial. The form asked one question: have you ever been made to feel small for being smart? Within a week, over 700 responses poured in, from teens across the country.
Black students, brown students.
First generation, gifted but silenced. Jayvion read every word. Stories of being skipped over in classrooms, mocked for asking too many questions, labeled aggressive for correcting a teacher, disbelieved when achieving high scores, removed from advanced classes without reason. All echoes of his own. By the end of the month, he launched the first version of Unmuted. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't a nonprofit yet. It was a digital forum, part testimony, part community, part resistance. It grew fast. One by one, students uploaded anonymous stories, videos, screenshots, curriculum disparities, teacher recordings, biased grading examples. Some came from elite private schools, others from rural districts, but the patterns were eerily consistent. Within a year, Unmuted had over 40,000 subscribers and partnerships with 3 youth advocacy groups. Jayvion gave his first public speech at a regional education summit. The auditorium was filled with policymakers, school board members, and educators. The same types who once treated him like a threat. He stood at the podium, older, still quiet, but clearer now. "My name is Jayvion Cross, and I am not a one-time story." He spoke not of his pain, but of what systems did to brilliance when it came wrapped in black skin. How genius wasn't nurtured, it was interrogated. How silence was often survival, not indifference. How policy could punish without ever raising its voice. By the time he stepped off the stage, the room had shifted. Not everyone clapped. Not everyone agreed. But no one could unhear him. And the ripple effects began. Several school districts began audits of their gifted programs. One state passed a bill requiring racial equity training for all AP and honors instructors. A university offered a full scholarship fund named after Jayvion for underrepresented STEM students. By the end of his sophomore year in college, Unmuted had gone national. But Jayvion never lost focus. Every interview he gave, he returned to one truth. This isn't about me. It's about the next kid who's told to sit down when he was born to stand up. That truth was tested and sharpened by 1,000 new testimonies sent to his inbox weekly. Each story was a reminder of how far they still had to go. But it was one invitation, unexpected, almost surreal, that made him pause, crest view high. The email was from a new principal. Young, black, woman. A clear contrast to the old regime. They were organizing a diversity and innovation speaker series. They wanted Jayvion to close it out. Tasha read the email over his shoulder. Her reaction was cautious. "You sure you want to go back there?" Jayvion stared at the screen. "I'm not going back for them. I'm going back for whoever I used to be." And so, years after the trial, the walkout, and the courtroom collapse of Langford's reputation, Jayvion returned, not as a student, not as a target, but as a speaker. He stepped onto the stage in the same gym where his mother once spoke, at the PTA meeting. The room was packed. Students leaned forward. Teachers lined the walls. Some looked new. Some, he recognized. He began the same way he always did. Not with credentials, but with truth. "I didn't come here today to be inspirational," he said. "I came here because some of you are still being asked to shrink." He didn't name names. He didn't tell old stories. He gave the floor to the students who hadn't yet found their voice. "Some of you will be tested, not in math but in patience, in dignity, in how long you can sit in rooms that don't see you. I want you to know, it's not your job to make them comfortable with your brilliance." The room was silent, and then a slow, steady clap began, followed by another, and another, until the gym echoed with applause, real, raw, unrehearsed. As Jayvion stepped down from the stage, he passed by rows of students. Some nodded, some mouthed thank you, one even wiped away tears. But just before he exited, he noticed something. A shadow near the back of the gym. Someone standing by the exit. Not clapping, not moving, watching. He couldn't see the face clearly. The light didn't quite reach them. But something in the posture felt familiar. Tall, still, silent. Jayvion's stomach turned slightly. Was it Langford? A former administrator? A critic? A reminder? He stepped forward slightly, as if to follow, but the shadow turned and slipped out the door before he could see. Jayvion paused, hand on the wall. Because no matter how far you go, the past never leaves quietly. Years later, Jayvion returns to speak at that same school, with someone watching from the shadows. The auditorium at the National Youth Science Symposium was silent, not out of boredom, but reverence. 1,000 students, educators, and innovators filled the vast room, all turned toward the stage where a single spotlight glowed. The name on the program was familiar now, etched into academic journals, social media, court transcripts, and legislation alike. Jayvion Cross. Years had passed since the viral video, the trial, the headlines, but tonight wasn't about the case. It wasn't about the apology. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about arrival. Jayvion stood center stage, tailored suit pressed, hands resting lightly on either side of the podium. The click of his slides echoed as the projector cast formulas across the screen behind him. Newton, Planck, Einstein, and then, his own. He didn't open with a greeting. He opened with a sentence that cut straight through the air. Every system, physical, social, or institutional, resists disruption until it's forced to evolve. A murmur passed through the room. It wasn't just theory, it was experience. He walked the audience through the basics first. The elegance of energy and mass, the velocity of light squared. But it wasn't long before the science folded into something deeper. He shifted the slide. On the screen now wasn't a formula, but a photo. A still image from the video. The whiteboard. The stunned faces. Jayvion standing beside the equation. He paused. "This photo," he said, "has been shared millions of times. People called it genius. Some called it staged. Some still do. But none of that matters anymore. What matters is what came after." He didn't flinch, didn't dramatize. "They said I cheated. That I embarrassed the school. That I was disruptive. But disruption isn't disorder. Disruption is the moment before transformation." He let the words breathe. "The truth is, my biggest equation wasn't physics. It was survival. It was how to stay whole in a system built to fracture you." The room sat still. Jayvion turned to another slide, a graph showing dropout rates of gifted black students. Another showing AP class disparities. Another with quotes from students around the country. Anonymous testimonies from unmuted. "Brilliance doesn't mean safety," he said. Not when your skin changes the narrative. He paced slowly. Do you know how many kids like me exist? He asked. How many are solving silent equations right now in the backs of classrooms that don't believe in them? No one answered. They didn't need to. Then, without warning, he flipped to the final slide. It wasn't a formula from physics. It was one he'd written himself. Truth x visibility. Silence e justice. A slow inhale rippled across the audience. He explained, truth is powerful. But truth in the dark changes nothing. Visibility multiplies it. But you must attract silence. Not just the silence they put on us, but the silence we take on to survive. He stepped forward. Justice isn't balance. It's exposure. It's the moment you stop shrinking. And just then, in the back of the room, a figure stood. Older, grayer, but unmistakable. Mr. Langford. His face was unreadable. Not defensive, not angry. Just human. Regretful. He didn't move to speak. He didn't sit. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching a boy he once tried to erase take command of a stage no one could take from him now. Jayvion saw him. And for a split second, their eyes locked. He didn't pause. He didn't flinch. He just said one final thing. You don't have to forgive the system to outgrow it. You just have to survive it long enough to redesign it.
The room erupted.
Not polite applause. A standing ovation that roared from wall to wall. Students jumped to their feet. Educators wiped their eyes. Organizers clapped until their palms stung. Jayvion didn't bow. He just stepped back, eyes still locked on the back of the room, on Langford. And Langford did something no one expected. He nodded. A small gesture, but Jayvion didn't nod back. Because this equation, this one wasn't for Langford. It was for every kid still sitting in the back of the room. Jayvion ends with a formula of his own, one that has nothing to do with science, and everything to do with justice. If you've ever been overlooked for speaking the truth, if you've ever watched brilliance be buried because of the skin it came in, then you already know Jayvion's story isn't rare. It's a reflection. Type yes. If you believe silence should never win, subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.